Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden with CJ. Welcome to Morning Tea with CJ, the show where I browse the web, see what's new in JavaScript land, or anything else related to programming, and then also maybe try to code something if I find some interesting libraries or something like that. If you are new to this show, you can go to github.com/codinggarden/morning-tea. You can see all of the links and things I've coded from all of the past episodes, and all of the stuff that I covered today will be there as well. Let's say hello to all the wonderful people in the chat. Hello, Amadou. Welcome to the stream. Hello, Myrn. Hello, Vias. Hello, Danielle. Hello, Hexception. Hello, Sarabi. Hello, the Code Flow Show, who says, first time I have been able to catch a show live. That's awesome. Welcome. And hello, Andreas, who says they're giving a talk. Wait, something's happening. Yeah, they're giving a talk at Drupal Camp, which is really sweet. So good vibes, good luck out to Andreas. You'll do fine. You'll do fine. Hello, Sergi. Welcome to the stream. Hello, Sylvia from Chicago. That's great. Hello, Levi from Finland. And Adam. Good night from Indonesia. People are all over. Hello, Zuhaib, who says it's the first time I'm live with TJ. Welcome. Hello, Christopher. And hello, Avi12, who says first time in a while that live stream is in the afternoon my time. Yeah, I've usually been streaming pretty late my time, which ends up being like the middle of the morning for most people. So for me, this is 9:40 a.m. On the weekend, usually I'm not awake at this time, but I've been going to bed a little bit earlier, so I'm awake earlier today. Hello, Nessie. Good morning. Hello, Oliver. Welcome to the stream. Hello, Joe. Hello, Elia. And hello, Oax Apps. Welcome. Typically, I just browse Reddit and find interesting things, and we talk about them. But also, if you have any questions, I'm open to answering them, or if you have any suggestions for things I should code, or if you have any news that I should check out, feel free to throw it in the chat, and we'll check that out as well. Hello, Bilal from Turkey. That's awesome. And Bloums says, morning stream. Yes, this is morning for me. And I actually didn't brew any tea. I have Zing tea. This is like a natural version of the Arizona green tea. I think it's based out of Colorado. Yeah, it's manufactured in Denver, Colorado. But it's green tea with ginseng and other natural flavors and honey and cane sugar. But I think it actually has a lot less sugar than the Arizona green tea. There's only 13 grams of sugar per serving. There's 3 servings in an entire can. I don't know. If you're drinking fun stuff, let me know what it is in the chat. Hello, Zuhaib from Pakistan. People are all over the world. That's great. Hello, Sheriff or Sharif. Danielle says that can is huge. Yeah, this is 23.5 ounces. Like I said, it's 3 servings. I don't know. Cool. All right, we're going to start off on r/JavaScript. And let's look at this first link, JavaScript for rendering ABC music notation. I'm not totally familiar with ABC music notation. Actually, I've never heard of it. But let's see. So what can this do? This can turn this into this. That's super cool. So I'm guessing ABC is a notation for music that can be rendered in many different ways, but in this case, they're actually using JavaScript to render, well, I guess not only are they rendering a beautiful, I forget what sheet music, like beautiful sheet music that you could follow along to, but I think you can play like the MIDI music. Let's see what happens. Wow. I don't know if you can hear that. Just a second. I think my, I have, what is it called? I have a noise gate filter, and it is too low. I mean, too high. So, let's see if you can hear it now. This is super cool though. So I'm guessing this notation here is how you describe the actual music notes. So like E major, E, E, E. So I guess when three things are close together, it creates a triplet. I'm curious how they define the different lengths of the notes. Can't really see it in there. That's interesting. But regardless, you can take this and then with JavaScript turn it into sheet music and apparently MIDI, which is really cool. Cool. Why did they do this? This library is for a web designer or a web programmer who wants to display standard music notation on their website. And there is a super chat from Amadou, $10, who says, next time, try fresh homemade tea. Keep up the good work. I appreciate that. I actually do have quite a bit of like tea bags in my cupboard upstairs, but this was easy and it tastes good. Let's catch up on the chat. Oh, Avi says they're creating an Electron app with Vue and Nuxt. That's super interesting because Nuxt, I guess, is typically server-side rendered, but I guess because it's a Node.js process, you could render it inside the Electron app. That's interesting. JJCP Jacobs asks, can you show us how to use import-export in the browser? That's actually a really good question and something cool to talk about because at least Chrome supports it. But it would be interesting to see how that works in the browser. So yeah, that'd be fun to show. It'd be a pretty quick demo. Hello, Maddie from Romania. Welcome. Exception says they're drinking Jack and Coke. I hope it's the evening where you are. Actually, I don't judge. You can drink in the morning if you want. Hello, Gabor from Hungary. And Gifted Fingers from Detroit. Welcome, welcome. Oh yeah, Myrn is asking, how am I using one mouse for two machines? I've talked about this in the past, but I'm using something called Share Mouse. There are other tools for it. I used to use something called Synergy. Synergy? Mouse and keyboard sharing? Yeah, yeah. I believe Synergy used to be free, but now they cost money. I used them a long time ago, probably like at least 9, 10 years ago. But yeah, Synergy is cool too. But I use this thing called Share Mouse. They have like a free version for up to 2 screens. I think more than that, it costs money. But yeah, basically you install it on both computers, and then I can take my mouse here and move it over to the computer that's way over there and play with it over there. So, cool. Yeah, we're getting lots of questions. Let's take note of these. We'll finish up talking about ABC.js, and then we'll answer some of these questions. Question from Sergi: have I tried Next.js? What are your thoughts? Only like at a superficial, like surface level have I tried Next.js, but I can definitely talk about it. Levi is asking, do you think mem as a stack is deprecated? Oh, Myrn. That's Mongo, Express, React, and Node. I don't think it's deprecated. I think it depends on what you're trying to do. This question might actually be related to Next.js because for whatever reason, as I'm browsing the web and I see people starting to that are mentioning like how to get up and going like with React and stuff, a lot of times they just start with Next.js, which is server-side rendered. Whereas this is typically 2 separate apps. So you have a separate backend and a separate front end. But so yeah, I'll talk about that. Exception saying it's nearly 5 p.m. so it's good. Yeah, I don't judge. You can drink whenever you want, and I hope it's good. Oh, okay. So Avi12 is from Israel, so that's why. Let's see what the current time in Israel compared to where I am in Denver. So 6:48 p.m. It's currently 9:48 a.m. here. So that's 12 minus 3, 9 hours ahead of me, I think. There's a website that lets you put like multiple time zones all on the same page. Yeah, but you're 9 hours ahead of me, which means when I stream at like 8 p.m., it's 3 or 4 a.m. for you, so I completely understand. Oh, interesting. JJCP Jacobs is saying using import-export with something like Babble, and then it can run on an Apache server or whatever. Okay, so I guess you're so he asked the question a little bit ago that was about import-export in the browser. I can expand on that a little bit. So one thing to talk about is It's like some browsers support it directly, so you can kind of just straight up do it. You just have to add an attribute to your script tag. But we could also talk about like how do you take code that has imports and exports and turn it into something that can run in pretty much any browser and be served up by like Apache or something like that. Cool. Hello Gulen, who says happy to see you live in Europe daytime. Yeah, I should stream more in the morning my time. It's just during the week I'm working. If I get to sleep early enough, I could wake up early enough and stream before I go to work. I know Brooks from Brooks Builds, he's been on the show, but you should check out Brooks Builds if you haven't. Let's see, Brooks Builds. Yeah, he streams on Twitch, but then he uploads to YouTube, but he streams pretty much every morning at probably like 7 a.m. my time. I'm usually not up that early. Well, I'm up, but I'm like getting ready. I don't know. Hello, Dirkerall, and a super chat from Daniel Davis. Daniel Davis just has the praise hands. Thank you so much, Daniel Davis. Hello, Linus Dev, who says it is 6 p.m. in Switzerland. That's great. Hello, Man on the Run from Greece. Ooh, interesting. Hello, Topher. Topher asks, have I read about Nodejs? It's Ryan Dahl's new project. So Ryan Dahl was the initial creator of Nodejs, and now there's Nodejs. It's super interesting. There was a talk that Ryan Dahl gave not too long ago about, it was basically like all the things he did wrong with Node.js and like why they're wrong. So maybe I've heard of Deno, but I'm thinking maybe this is his newer version with all the things fixed that he thought were broken with Node.js. I just want to look it up really quick to see if I have heard of it. Yeah, so you can see the link is purple, so I've clicked it before, but I don't know much about it. A secure JavaScript/TypeScript runtime built with V8, Rust, and Tokyo. Cool. So it's kind of like Node, but better. Relatively better, depending, I don't know. But yeah, I can talk about it. It seems cool. Nessie is asking about promises. I love promises, and I can talk about it as well. Because yeah, so and so they're mentioning like they're using async await, but they actually had to use a new promise anyway. The thing is, async await is just syntactic sugar for promises. So if you're using async await, you still kind of have to know how promises work. And sometimes you might end up actually creating a promise in the case of new promise when you're using async await. And I could definitely talk about that. Hello, Russia. Welcome to the stream. Yeah, Nessie is saying, even if I don't understand, I tried it and it worked. Yeah, let's just do a async await promises example. And hello, Geo. But Golan asks, what is better for doing a quick document page for an API or package? A custom-built one or a framework? I think it depends. Lately, I have been leaning towards like auto-generated documentation, mainly because it can stay updated as the code changes. But it varies. If you have a very simple project that's not going to change that often, it might be easy enough to just create the documentation manually. Tips on starting with TypeScript? Not really, because I haven't really used it in any major projects. Nessie says, if you have 3 kids under 3, you'll wake up early. I don't sleep. My heart goes out to you. But yeah, I don't have any kids. It's just me. Hello, Javani, who asks, what do I think about Flutter? We will definitely answer that and talk about it. I think it might have mentioned it on this morning T stream before. Hello, Himanshu. It's been a while. Welcome. Hello, Alex from France. Yeah, Im@, is saying, did you see all the drama about the function-based way of writing view components? I absolutely did. I think I talked about it on the last, I did an afternoon T stream. That was the one where I built a simple app with Svelte, but before that, someone had asked, and I gave my opinions on it. We can touch on it again, and potentially write something with a new function-based API, because it's pretty interesting. Mayur is asking about Rxjs. Maybe. It is, I would say, tangentially related to promises, because Rxjs is about streams of data. And it's similar in that you can kind of say, like, when this thing happens, do this thing, but it's different in that promises only resolve once. So you can say, wait for this promise to finish and then do this thing, but that promise is never going to be resolved again, because it can only be resolved once, but with streams, they can just keep resolving. You can say, wait for this thing, and whenever it happens, do this thing, and that thing can keep happening over and over again. So many questions. I should just do like a dedicated... this stream always ends up turning into a question answer stream, but it's fun. I should just call it that instead, though. Adam is asking, can I continue your stream about 101 ways to deploy to React? What would you... Actually, did I not finish it? I think there's some things I left off. Like I didn't do S3 bucket on AWS or something. But yeah, let me know which ones you would like to see me deploy on, and I can probably do that. Cool. Austin is saying, hello from the UK. Can you share some advice on securing Node.js applications ready for production and deployment? I can share what I know. Absolutely. 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 All right. We're gonna pause there. We're gonna finish up ABC.js. I'll answer some questions and then we'll go back to the chat. There are 60 people watching, so I probably won't have time to answer everyone's questions, but we're at least gonna get to these questions that came in first because they're interesting. Cool. Yeah. So initially we're talking about this new library called ABC.js, which you take notation like this and it turns it into actual sheet music and a MIDI sound, which is really cool. How does it work? Yeah, I'm guessing there are different notations for ABC.js. Yeah, so there's ABC.js basic, ABC.js basic plus MIDI. Yeah, so this actually this is super cool. Okay, you know what I want to do? I want to use this to play or to create Mary Had a Little Lamb, like da na 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 na. That would be great. I kind of want to do that. Can use this library. Is it on GitHub? Yeah, it's on GitHub. Cool. Last push 24 minutes ago. This is super cool. Okay, I'm just gonna hold on to this because it would be really fun to try to create some notation that generates a song. So we'll add it as a link. Yeah, that's super cool. All right, let's try to answer 3 questions and then we'll look back at the chat and then maybe look back at some news. Okay. JJCP Jacobs is asking, can you show me how to use import export and use it in a browser? They mean something like Babble that can run on Apache or like some server that can serve up those files. So actually, that is a little bit ambiguous. When you say Apache server, I'm thinking you mean a server that just like serves up static files. Because that's typically what Apache does. There's like plugins for, I'm guessing, like PHP that will like interpret that code, but typically I don't think you can run Node.js code on Apache. I may be wrong. It's been a very long time since I used Apache. But what I think you're asking is, okay, I write code with import export. How do I get it to just run inside of a browser? Let's do a very simple example. Import export example. Okay. So if I were to create a file, index.html, I'm going to create a folder just called JS. That's where I'm going to put all of my JavaScript in. Our index.html is just a basic HTML page. Hello world. And right here, let's say I have an H1, and it has like ID of current date time. And I want to use JavaScript to put the current date time into this H1. First, initially it'll just say loading. Okay, cool. So in my terminal, let's go into that folder. We'll start a super basic server. I'll use light server for this. Okay, so we just have a page that says loading. So now I want to bring some JavaScript in that's going to update this H1 to be the current date and time. So here's what we'll do. In our JavaScript folder, let's create a new file. Let's call it getDateTime.js. And we're going to use import export syntax. So in here, I'm going to create a function called getDateTime. and this is just going to return a new date dot to locale string. I think that'll give us the full timestamp. Okay, so this is a simple little function. It just returns the current date and time. But what I'm going to do is export default it. So this is syntax that says this specific file exports this function so it can be used somewhere else. So now let's create another file. Let's just call it index.js. And this file wants to import getDateTime from getDateTime. And then we'll just do some regular plain old DOM manipulation. So we'll say, like, let's grab the h1 on the page. That'll be document.querySelector. The thing with ID, what do we call it? Current date time. Okay, so we grab that element. And then I think I just want to set a timeout. So like every second, we're going to update the h1's content. So let's do set interval. And so every 1 second, I'm going to say h1.textContent equals getDateTime. So every second, it's going to call that function that we imported from that file. It's going to update the text content, which should in turn show the current date and time on the page. Great. So now all we have to do is load index.js into our script here. So, or into our HTML. So we'll add a script tag. We'll say source equals index.js, and let's see what will happen. Open the DevTools. Oh, sorry. It needs to be js/index.js because we're in here. We want to go into the JS folder and grab that index.js file. Okay. Now, if we just do this by default, we're going to get an error, unexpected identifier on line 1. By default, the browser does not know import export syntax. So I think the first way to fix this is by telling the browser that this is a module. I need to look that up, but yeah, let's do JavaScript module in browser. I think what we're gonna need to do is say like type equals module, something like that. I don't think that's it. Yeah, that breaks it. Oh, that might have actually worked because you can see now it's trying to make the request for js/getDateTime, but the reason it's not working is because I'm using light server, I believe. Let's use HTTP server. HTTP server just serves anything and everything else, anything and everything up that you request. Let's see. Oh, okay, interesting. So it tried, and so I think I got it right by guessing, but you'll see. It tries to make a request for js/getDateTime. I need to specify the .js because it needs to know how to get that file. Okay, let's try again. Hard refresh. Hey, it's working. So 1 second later, we get the time. Cool, it's updating. So this is great. So like by default, if you're using a browser that supports modules, this is pretty much all you have to do is you can say script type equals module. And then if you have import export syntax anywhere, that's just going to work automatically. You can look up caniuse.com to see what browsers support it. JavaScript modules via the script tag. So IE11 has no support. Edge supports it. And then there's some mobile browsers that don't support it. So 86% of browsers support it. So technically you could be writing code like this today. But the question that I think JJCP Jacobs was also asking was, okay, what if I want to support a browser that doesn't know import export syntax? Or what if I don't want to put this type module on here? This is where a tool like Babble would come into play. And I am really surprised that I just got that. I guessed that on the first try. So if you put type module, the browser now knows, hey, I'm going to have to look for import export syntax and use that. A polyfill is available for Safari and iOS, so that's cool. Okay, so that's great, but let's just get like a simple Babble thing set up. So if you look up Babble.js, this is they call themselves a JavaScript compiler. They're technically a transpiler because they take JavaScript code that is written one way, in this case, written with like import and export syntax, like this export default and this import from. This was syntax that was introduced in ES 2015. So in the 2015 version of ECMAScript, which is what JavaScript is based on, that's when this syntax was introduced. And not every browser supports it. So Babble is a tool that will take code that you wrote like this and transform it into something that browsers that don't know import-export syntax can actually still work. So let's look at their docs. And I believe if we use preset env, we can get import-export syntax working. Yeah. The other thing you might use here is like a combination of like Babble with Webpack, because Webpack is a module bundler. And what that would allow you to do is not only import JavaScript files, but you could import images and import CSS and import other things, lots of things. And ultimately, it would bundle all of those things up. Anything that was JavaScript, it could run it through Babble. But let's just get like a basic Babble setup. The other thing, which is a really cool tool, is Rollup. It's very similar to Webpack, but it actually... Not Rollup. So Rollup is one of them. The one I'm thinking of is Parcel. Parcel is like super simple. There's like barely any configuration that you have to set up. So here's what you do. You have an index.html. It just brings in a plain old script tag. You don't have to put that type module, but your script tag can have import-export syntax in it. And Parcel will turn it into something that the browser can understand. And under the hood, it's using Babble. It absolutely is, because that's like the de facto tool for transpiling JavaScript, but it kind of like hides all the implementation details. Let's do a quick poll. Should we Babble? So we'll have to set it up and get it all going. Or should we use something like Parcel, which is kind of just going to work for us? Or should we do something like Webpack plus Babble? Or should we do something like Rollup plus Babble? What do you want to see me do right now? Let's look at the chat. I'm going to send that message. I have to keep my track, because I keep track of where I was, because I'm sure there are a lot of messages in there. Okay, so go to that poll. How should I set this up so that if I were to just do this without the type module, it would still work, and it would work in most browsers? Because now if I do that, it's broken. Okay, while people are voting, let's catch up on the chat. I think I've seen all of this. Yeah, I think that, yeah, this was the last question that I answered. Hexception says, I currently just started working on a project, and I just realized how much bad code there is. There is so much bad code out there. Let's just have a moment of silence for all the bad code out there in the world. Yeah, there's a lot of bad code. Like I've been coding for like over 10 years now. I mean, more than that. And the majority of code is bad code. It's kind of sad to say, but yeah, it's kind of hard to find good code. Civil Servant says, I want to learn Spring Boot. Do I need good knowledge of Spring Framework for it? That's kind of like out of my element. I've made like a super simple API with Spring Boot. So Spring Boot is Java based. And I'm pretty sure you can create like RESTful APIs. So like Spring REST. So you could create a RESTful API and then hit that RESTful API from pretty much any front end. I'm not familiar with Spring Framework, but as far as I know, you can pick up Spring Boot and kind of just start building. So. Hello, Arish from India. Welcome. Gio is saying, would you consider doing any future projects with PHP? I might consider it. I know Laravel is really big these days. And there are some more modern PHP frameworks that makes writing PHP code fun again, and like more and very similar to like how you write code with Node.js. So yeah, I may consider it. Ryan Rhodes says, just got back home from Denver. Definitely a unique city. Denver is an interesting place. It is. There's lots of breweries. Marijuana is legal, so there's lots of that. Lately, the weather has been super weird. We're in the middle of the summer, and typically it's really hot. Like, it's really hot right now, but also it like snowed for like a really long time, and then also we've been having hail like consistently. I don't know. The weather is weird right now. But yeah, it's a cool place. I like it. I just bought a house here, so I'm sticking around for a while. Eddie asks, do you drink tea instead of coffee in the mornings? Yeah, typically I will either drink tea or take some yerba mate supplements. So I have yerba mate extract. So it's basically like concentrated caffeine, and that way I don't have to brew tea or coffee, and I can just take that. But I definitely prefer tea over coffee. All right, we're gonna stop there and we'll catch up on the chat. It looks like everyone wants me to set up Webpack with Babble. Or Babel. That's the majority of the votes. The interesting thing to note is, like, and I mentioned it, with parcel, it's literally like one line of code. You just say parcel index.html and it does it all for you. Webpack version 4 might be a little more pre-configured, but yeah, let's set it up. All right, let's go to Webpack. Webpack. And the thing to note is, if you're using something like Create React App or the Vue CLI, it sets up Webpack under the hood for you. You really don't have to touch it unless you want to start to customize it. But typically, you would never have to write this Webpack configuration from scratch. But you can. Okay. So, and I believe the latest version of Webpack supports not having a config. Let's just try it. We're not even going to look at the docs. We're going to install it and run it against our index.js and see what happens. Okay, so we're in this import export example folder. I will need a package JSON, so I'm going to do an npm init. That gives me the package JSON, so that way when I install Webpack, it gets listed as a dependency. I'm going to install it as a dev dependency because really you only need Webpack if you're in development. So you do -D or -- save dev. Webpack, go. And hopefully it's called Webpack. It should be called, it's Webpack, it's definitely Webpack. Okay, and now I have a package JSON in this folder. So let's add a script that just says build. And I'm just gonna try this. We'll need to probably look at the docs if it doesn't work, but I'm gonna say webpack js/index.js. So I want to build that file. This may be wrong. I should probably just look at the docs, but let's see what happens if I do this. So now that I have this build script, we're just gonna run npm run build. I did npm rub build. npm run build. There we go. Okay, one CLI for Webpack must be installed. These are recommended choices delivered as separate packages. Yeah, so apparently I needed the CLI, not just Webpack. So yes, let's install that, please. Wow, it just worked. So you'll notice it says our entry point is this main.js, so which is js/index.js, and it had multiple modules inside of it. But then you'll see that it created this dist folder. This dist folder just has one file in it, main.js, and main.js is basically all of the code that I need. And it's all of the transpiled code and all the imports and exports and everything all in that one file. So now in my what do you call it? In my index.html, instead of referencing js/index.js, I should reference dist. So this is the compiled version or transpiled version of the code and bundled version of the code. So now that we have that, and we go back to the browser, I may actually need, do I need Babble? Maybe I don't need Babble because of the simple import-export syntax. Oh, it's dist main.js. There you go. And it works. So that's cool. Webpack kind of just does all of that for you. Let's take a look at this main.js. So we can see this main.js is minified, meaning all the code is on one line. Let's format it. And let's see if we can try to understand it and read it. Okay, so there's the code that we wrote in our index.js, which has like the query selector and the text content. That's great. But it looks like Webpack has transformed our imports and exports. So it turned that file into a function. And then if we look at try and find our other function. Oh, you know what? It just inlined. It inlined the function. And so let's look at how we originally wrote it. We wrote it as index.js imports this function and then calls it. But apparently, whenever Webpack put this all together, it decided, okay, we're not even going to create a separate function. We're just going to take the code that's inside of this function and put it right there on that line. So that's super interesting. So it took my code, converted it into this. You can see there are no import-export syntax. And it looks like there's some, this is probably like polyfill code. So, yeah, so like if symbol doesn't exist, it creates, wait, so if symbol is not undefined and all this stuff, I don't know, is this polyfilling? What is this doing exactly? I don't know, it's doing some other stuff. But apparently this was actually super easy to do with Webpack. And that's really because of Webpack version 4. But you could create your own configuration file and then specify settings for Babble and say, like, I want to support even some later, like most recent features. And then Webpack would basically, anytime it sees a JavaScript file, it would know to run that through Babble first before doing its own thing. So that was way easier than I expected it to be. But this is pretty much what you would have to do, Mr. JJCP Jacobs, who asked about how do we use import-export in the browser. So talked about two ways. First, you could just straight up use it. If you do type equals module, your code will pretty much just work. The second way of doing it is transpiling your code to not have imports or exports. And for that, you can use Webpack. You can use Babble standalone. You can use Babble combined with Webpack. You can use Parcel. You can use Rollup. You can use Broccoli. There's a million other ones. But at the end of the day, they all kind of do the same thing. They take your code that you wrote with imports and exports and turn it into something that pretty much any browser will understand that doesn't have imports, exports. Whew. That was interesting. That was fun. And Webpack is now apparently way easier than it used to be. It used to be you had to have a configuration, but now you can just run it, which is cool. I like it. All right. I'm going to scroll all the way down in the chat to see if anybody is talking about the Webpack stuff that I was talking about. Wait, somebody's making fun of his code? Nobody make fun of his code. Who's making fun of his code? We don't do that around here. Okay. Yeah, Topher is saying Parcel or Rollup. I spent last week trying to learn Webpack plus Babble. It would be good to get something new. Yeah, Parcel is super interesting, though. You literally can just say parcel index.html. It finds any script tag references, automatically transpiles those. Like, Parcel is really cool. And then Rollup does require a configuration. So with Rollup, I believe we would probably have had to install the Babble Rollup plugin to get that import-export syntax. I don't know. Mainly these days, I'm working in an application that already has all of this set up. So I'm working in something that was Create React app or something that was like a Vue CLI app. So I don't really have to worry about setting it up from scratch. But, you know, it's a thing. Yeah, Topher is saying housing costs in Denver are through the roof. They are. I paid, like, the amount I paid for this house here in Denver. Like, my family lives back home in Louisiana where things are a lot cheaper. I could have probably bought like 3 houses for the amount I paid for this one house. Hello, Julian. Welcome to the stream. Okay. Oh, okay. Riku is saying, oh, making fun of my code was, I was talking about bad code. Yeah, so here's the thing. I used to tell my students, so I used to teach people how to code, and I would tell them that your code is horrible. Like, I would straight up tell them, the code you write today is nowhere near the code you're going to write even 6 months from now. So, like, when you start to learn to code, like, there's so much that you don't know, and there's so much that you have to figure out that you can't really worry about all the details of writing like the best code possible. Like, you're just trying to get it to work. But as you get more familiar and as you write more code, you pick up patterns and you pick up best practices, and the code you write starts to get a whole lot better. So yeah, I used to tell my students, like, on day one, your code is horrible. It's pretty much always going to get horrible, always be horrible. But if you are diligent, it's always going to be getting better. And I even say that about my own code. Like, the code I write today, like a few months from now, I could probably write it better just because I have more experience. Like, not only more experience in coding, but more experience in that problem domain. And I maybe thought of a better way to solve it, or I've already solved it once. So my brain is working in a way that it can solve it in a more streamlined way that maybe I didn't think about when I initially coded it. I don't know. That's really all I'm saying. And the longer I've coded, the more I've tended towards reusability, modularity, all the things that make it so that you basically have to write less code. Like, good code is no code. Cool. Question from Beck. This is where we left off. Can you please tell me about styled components and React best practices to style Material UI? We can talk about it. Yeah. So, when I did, what did I do? The hot one sauceless. When I built this pepper, I used, and actually this whole website is built with React. I used JSS, which is CSS in JavaScript. Styled components are slightly different. And if you're using Material UI, it actually uses JSS under the hood. But yeah, we can talk about it. All right, I'm going to catch up on all the questions, but then I'm going to go back to my document and pick up where I left off, which is right here. Topher is saying, they just watched all 4 parts of my Trello app. Do I plan to finish it? I probably should. Honestly, I kind of want to rewrite it. I was just mentioning it. The code you wrote months ago is not the code you write today. But it would be cool to finish it. I think I need to add things like setting the order of the cards on a given list. I don't know if we ever added sharing with other users. There's things I can add to it that I probably should, that I will eventually do. Yeah. I don't know when, but I definitely should. Giovanni is asking, jQuery is dead? jQuery is not dead. So the reason you see less and less people using it is because the browser has things built into it now that basically make it so you don't really have to use jQuery anymore. You have things like query selector all. Query selector all has for each built into it. Didn't used to, but now it does in more modern browsers. Like, there are a lot of things that are just supported by default where you don't really have to reach for jQuery anymore. That said, there are a lot of old websites that were built with jQuery, so if you're looking for a job, you probably need to know it to be able to work on those websites. Like, they're not going to rewrite them just because the browser now supports this stuff. Yeah, so it's not dead. I would say newer projects maybe might not reach for it because you have other things. So, I mean, does that mean it's dead, though? I don't know. I would say, like, people are still using it. You can still get a job writing jQuery. So in that vein, it's not dead. But at the same time, there are better things. There are things built into the browser, so you don't necessarily need it anymore. This is what Adam had a question earlier about the deploying React apps, and he's mentioning I should deploy to S3. Absolutely. I will make note of it. It's here. Ooh, Man on the Run is saying, maybe irrelevant to web dev. I don't think it is. If it involves JavaScript, it's relevant. Logic Pro has a MIDI plugin called Scripter, which accepts JavaScript code to manipulate MIDI data. Would you think of making a tutorial about it? So I don't have Logic Pro, but I do have Ableton. And I think Ableton has a scripting interface. That would be an interesting stream. Where maybe we could create a custom VST or a custom plugin for Ableton that uses JavaScript. That's interesting. Sergi, playing Minecraft while watching. Relax, 200%. Hello, hola mundo. Welcome to the stream. Pranjal is saying, show how to render a React component on an on-click event. That seems doable. Hello, Chris Perez. Welcome to the stream. Oh, actually, yeah, you sent me a bunch of Discord messages. I'm sorry I haven't gotten back to you. I was busy with work and the Hot Wing stream, but I'll get back to you soon. Oh yeah, and JJCP Jacobs meant I meant not Node. Yeah, so I was asked, he had the question earlier about something like running an Apache. So I think he is. The idea is Apache is really just serving up static files to the browser, like the thing that we kind of just demonstrated. Cool. Icy Killer YT is saying, how do you guys deal with procrastination? Poorly. I procrastinate all the time. I don't know. We can talk about that though. Yeah, Topher says, I'll get back to you on that later. Avi12 is saying, isn't the best practice for IDs or classes to use kebab case? Maybe? I don't know if it's a best practice, or maybe... Yeah, the thing is, working in React and Vue, like, you really don't use ID selectors much. And then when it comes to class selectors, that's more along the lines of, like, what is your coding style guide for CSS classes? But it could be. I don't know for sure. But what they're mentioning is, should I have potentially written this as current dash date dash time? Yeah, I don't know if this is a best practice, more of a style preference. Because they both work, the browser understands both, so yeah. Hello, Mox from Krakow, Poland. That's great. Welcome to the stream. Nessie is saying, am I normal to be scared of a memory leak with set interval? I always use set timeout recursively. You're not paranoid. In my particular example, this is literally all my code is doing. So like when the page starts, it just needs to call this function once every second till the end of time. If you're doing something like this in React, where you're not exactly in charge of when and how often things get re-rendered, you could potentially create a bunch of set intervals that are all running in parallel, depending on where you actually put this code. And that's where it might make more sense to do something like you have a function, you have a set timeout, and then at the bottom of the function you call set timeout. That's typically how I write my code if I'm trying to do something like this. But in this particular example, this is literally all the code is doing, so I really don't have to worry about memory leaks. But yeah, you're on the right track where I pretty much I follow the same practice. So like instead of doing something like this, I would create a function called like update title. Inside of here is where I would do this code. And then underneath it, I would say, well, not at, like, at the bottom of the function, I would say set timeout. And the thing that I want to run in 1 second is update title. And then to start it all off, I would invoke it like that. So when the page starts, call this function. This function is going to do it. And then a second later, it's going to call itself. The reason you would write it this way is you could potentially have some guard logic, like if some reason not to run again. And you could put that in there so you could eventually stop it. That way you don't have to hold on to the ID of set interval. But yeah, this is typically how I write my code that needs to run over and over again. You might also use request animation frame. I don't think this accepts a timeout though. You just give it a function and it's gonna call it on the next paint of the screen. I don't know, I digress. Jonas is saying, are there any benefits to using query selector instead of get element by ID? Let's do a quick little check here. So I believe the thing you get back from them are the same. So let's do var thing1 equals document dot get element by ID. What is our ID? Current date time. And if we do type of thing1, it's an object. Thing1 dot name. Constructor dot name. Yeah. So the element, the thing we got back from get element by ID is an HTML heading element. And I think that will be the same thing if we use query selector. The one difference with query selector all, so let's try query selector. Thing2. And if we do thing2 dot constructor. Oh, sorry. We this didn't work. Thing2 is undefined. We need to use pound because we want to get the ID. But if we do thing2, whoa. Yeah, so at the end of the day, both those are giving you back the same thing. There might be a performance benefit. I don't know how the DOM structures things in terms of like their ID. Like maybe when you get an element by ID, it doesn't have to search through every single thing. I don't know. The internal algorithm could be a little bit different. But what is different is query selector all, because I believe query selector all returns a particular type of collection. Yeah, it returns a node list. But if you did something like get elements by class name, I think you get not a node list, you get something else. Yeah, here you get an HTML collection, and there are slight differences. So HTML collection versus a node list. So query selector all versus one of the other methods that'll give you back an array of things. I think that's where your main differences are going to come from. Okay, I digress. I answered a question. I still have more questions to answer. Yeah, John is asking about my keyboard. I'll talk about that too. Okay. I realize this isn't the best way to do this because now I'm way behind. Like I'm still on question number 2, which happened a long time ago, but there's a lot of chat coming in. So I'm going to keep that there. We're going to go on to the next question. And take a sip of my tea because I haven't sipped my tea in a while. Have I tried Next.js? What are your thoughts? This question comes from Sergi. I have tried it. It is very cool. So if you're not familiar with Next.js, it's a way of doing server-side rendered React. And they call it the React framework for production, for server-side rendered apps, for static websites as well, because it has a static site builder. But basically, Next.js has an opinionated way of structuring your code in that you have like a pages directory, and every single component you put in the pages directory becomes a route available in your app. It has server-side rendering out of the box. So the idea with that is you can write code. I don't know if it's in like component did mount. There's a specific function you can put your code inside of where if the server is serving up that page, it'll actually run that code on the server to like request data, hydrate your app, serve up an app that has pre-rendered HTML with extra JavaScript that will basically behave as React after that. So it's kind of like the best of both worlds. You get super fast load time, search engine optimization because it's all server-side rendered. But then once the page loads, it starts behaving like a single page application, and JavaScript handles like changing pages and routes and stuff like that. So that's super interesting. My thoughts on it are it's cool. Like if you need search engine optimization, if you need super fast page load times, you should probably look at something like this if you're already using React. I personally haven't used it. I still prefer just keeping my apps totally separate. Like typically the work that I do, like at my job and just other things that I've done, are building tools and products for people. So these are typically like internal facing tools. These aren't things that are available to the world. They're really just only available on an intranet or only available for the people inside of a company. And when it's something like that, you don't need search engine optimization because the people in the company are just using that tool. They're not searching the web to find it. So in that way, I still prefer a totally separate JSON API with a totally separate front end. But something like Next.js is cool, and it gives you server-side rendering. There's also Nuxt.js, which is for Vue.js. Similar idea, very similar to Next, but it's for Vue instead. So you get server-side rendering. I believe they also have a similar directory structure where you have pages. Any component that's inside of there is going to get its own route. So the question was, what are my thoughts? My thoughts are, it's cool. If it's something that you need, you should probably use it. But if it's not, then don't use it. Levi is asking, do you think the Myrn stack is deprecated? So Myrn, have to sneeze. Myrn typically stands for Mongo, Express, where we go, React, Node, the Myrn stack. And also, I don't even know if this actually is a thing, like the I didn't take my allergy medicine today. I definitely need to do that. But what did they used to call it? It was Express, Node, Angular, and Mongo. I can find the acronym. The mean stack: Mongo, Express, Angular, and Node. This was super popular when Angular version 1 was out. People used to say, like, do you know the mean stack is basically like an Express and Node backend with a Mongo database and an Angular 1 front end. And then when React started to get more popular, this stack became fairly common. Is it still a thing, though? Do people call it Myrn? Introducing the Myrn and mean stacks. Myrn. Yeah, so this is saying it's deprecated because this is a specific library or a specific CLI tool for creating applications that follow this Mongo, Express, React, Node stack. So if we're talking about the tool specifically, then very apparently it is deprecated. And yeah, and I guess they're the same people that made that mean stack tool. But in general, if we look at each of these technologies separately, they are absolutely not deprecated. And you, as a developer, could create your own stack with these 4 things all day long, use the latest version of each, and that is not deprecated. So if you're writing an app and you choose these technologies, absolutely not. If you were trying to use that Myrn tool or whatever that was, then yes, that is deprecated. I actually hadn't heard of that. Yeah, but applications are absolutely still being built this way. I mentioned it a second ago, but one reason this potentially might be deprecated, or you may use something else, is because of something like Next.js. So Next.js covers these 3 pieces. It takes the Express, React, and Node and smushes them all into one thing. And with that, you would still need to choose your own database, so you could still use Mongo. So you may potentially do like Next.js plus Mongo. But yeah, I'll say you absolutely can build apps this way. It's not deprecated, but that thing is. All right, moving right along. Topher asked about Nodejs. It is Ryan Dahl's new project. So Ryan Dahl was the creator of Node.js. He was the first person to take the V8 engine that's in Chrome and try running JavaScript code on the server side just using that engine. So he made Node.js. But he actually has come out and say there are certain things about Node.js that he doesn't like or he wish he wouldn't have done. And Deno.js is kind of like, if you could do it all over again, this is what Node.js would be. So Deno is a secure runtime for JavaScript and TypeScript built with V8, Rust, and Tokyo. Yeah, so it has import-export syntax like out of the box. I know with Node.js, I think you need a feature flag to be able to do that, just because of the way the node resolution algorithm, the module resolution algorithm was implemented. Yeah, so that's super interesting. I've never actually used it, but I like the concept. So that's what I know about it. And maybe I can find the video. Ryan Dahl, Node.js. He had a talk that was like things I would have done differently. Yeah, Ryan Dahl's Node.js regrets lead to Deno. Let's search for that. Node.js regrets. 10 things I regret about Node.js. This is the one. I think like some people just didn't like the way he handled things in this talk, because he definitely was very negative about a lot of stuff in Node.js. But it's a super interesting talk because it points out all the things that you may not have thought about in Node.js that actually aren't that great. So check out that talk. Nessie is asking, can you explain what new promise is for? I thought async await was doing that, but I ended up needing it last night. This is great. Let's do it. Let's do a promise example because I love promises. I love async await. Yeah, let's just call it index.js. So we're going to run this code with Node. We're not going to run it in a browser, but let's think about what we want to do. So I guess we could just use async await really quick. Let's do this. So I'm going to bring in the FS library from the promises library from FS. So FS is a core Node.js module for reading and writing files on the system. They currently have this promises namespace where all of the FS functions have promise equivalents. So you can do like fs dot read file, write file, read directory, change the mode of a file, change the owner of a file. All of the file system things that you would need to do, you can do it with this promises namespace, and all of these functions return a file. So let's do this. We want to create a function that, let's just say output file. You give it a path, and then it will need to read that file in and then just console log it out. So we're going to make this an async function, and we'll say file contents equals await fs.read file. And we want to read the path that you pass in. And then the encoding most likely is just UTF-8, so we'll do that. And then here we'll just log file contents. So what this does is you give it a path to a file. It reads that file in, and this is an asynchronous function, meaning it's not going to complete immediately. It has to read the file in, do all that business, and we don't want this to block. We don't want this to like stop our process completely. We want it to kind of do it in the background, and then whenever it's done, we take the output, put it in this variable, and just log it to the console. Super simple. Okay, so now to call our function, we would do output file, and let's give it a path to this readme, because why not? So we're going to copy that path. We're going to say, I want you to output that readme file. And that's all. Okay, so Super simple, doesn't really do anything complex. I honestly don't know where I'm going with this or how I'm going to relate it to promises, but this function will read the file and output it. So let's run it. So we're going to go into our async example file folder, and we're just going to run this file with Node. So we run the file, it invokes this function. This function is an async function, which ultimately means it returns a promise. Okay, I think that's how I'm going to tie this in, because we'll show it in a second. But for now, let's just see it work. It should read in the file and then just put it out in the console. Go. There it is. So that's the README file, and it just spit it out. Great. Now, what if I want to do something when this function has completed? And because it is an async function, it returns a promise. So that's why I mentioned earlier async await. It's not replacing promises. It's just syntactic sugar on top of promises. You still have to know promises in order to use them. So let's say I want to do something when this function is done running. I couldn't really just say, I couldn't do it here. I couldn't say, we are done, rainbow emoji. When I run this code, this is actually going to be the first thing that logs, because this is asynchronous and it's happening behind the scenes. But if I want this to run when this function is done, I have to use the mechanics of promises to get that working. But if I run this code now, we can see that we are done is actually the first thing that got logged. And that's because of this, the idea of things being asynchronous. They're happening at different times, they're happening in the background. So if I really want this to happen after we're done outputting the file, I need to .then the output file function. And the reason I am able to do this is because output file is an async function. And by default, an async function, or not by default, the nature of an async function is that it returns a promise. Like if you put the word async on a function, it's going to return a promise, no matter what. So the fact that this returns a promise means we can chain, we can do .then on it, and then we can do we are done. So this will actually wait until this is done to do the we are done log. So now, if I run this code, it should print it out, and then we see we are done as the last thing instead of the first thing, because we gave it a function and said, hey, don't call this function right now, but call this function whenever this is completed. Cool. Now, the case where we might want to do something like new promise. So the question that was being asked by Nessie, can you explain what new promise is for? I thought async await was doing that, but I ended up needing it last night. So typically you need new promise if you're working with something that, what do you call it? That is not promise based. So if you're working with a library that uses like callbacks instead of promises, you may end up wrapping it in your own promise. So for this example, I'm just using the promises namespace because that already exists. But what if this didn't exist? What if we had to use just the regular FS library? And FS still has read file. But it also has read file sync. So read file sync is a blocking function, meaning if we call read file synchronous, all of my other code just stops and waits for it to read that file in. And typically you don't want to do that. You would want to use read file, which actually requires a callback function. So let's do something very similar. So now that we don't have the promises namespace anymore, we'd have to create our own promise. So if we create a function, output file, we give it a path. We want to say fs.readFile. We pass in the path. We tell it it's going to be UTF-8. And then because this doesn't return a promise, we need to specify a callback function. So typically the way callback functions work in Node.js is first it will give you if there was an error, and then it'll give you the result of that particular callback. So here is where we could actually log that output. In this case, we'll call it file contents. Great. And the main reason we're doing this with this callback function is because by default, the FS namespace does not have promises on it. It only supports callbacks. So now if I want this code to work, I can call the output file function. That's going to call fs.readFile. It's going to read in the path that you give it. It'll call this, and if there was no error, it'll log out the contents. Typically, you would do something like if error, I don't know, return console.error. So that way it'll log it out if there was an error. And then it won't execute the code below it. But let's try to just run this code with callbacks. Okay, so we do node index.js. There's the file contents. Great. But what if we want to do the same thing that we did before? What if we want to log we are done when the whole thing is done? Well, just like the promise example, callbacks are technically asynchronous as well. So if I put this we are done console log at the end, that's actually going to be the first thing that runs. Yeah. So when we see it, it actually runs first, but we want it to run afterwards. The old way of doing this before we had promises was with a callback function. So I could actually create my function to take in a callback function that would then call that function when it's done. So I could do something like this. If I pass in a function, I'm basically, I need to now code output file to say, the second parameter is a callback, and whenever you're done, I need you to call that function. So now up here, we could take in the callback, and then we'll say like if callback is defined, then we invoke it. And so now what this will do is it will use the callback version of read file, put out the contents, and then if we passed in a callback function, it's going to invoke it for us, which will then log we are done. So now we are done is going to be the second thing that logs. Here we go. Okay, so now it's the second thing. Great. But callbacks are ugly. Like the more and more callbacks you have, the deeper your code gets, and that's pretty much why we started using things like promises. And so yeah, this code is ugly. I don't want to have to pass a callback in. What I want, and what would be wonderful, is if output file actually returned a promise. So if I was actually able to say then, and then here is where I say we are done. But I can't do that right now because this function does not return a promise. But what if I did make it return a promise? So what I could do, and this is where I would need to create my own promise. So the way a promise works is you can say new promise. So this is the promise constructor, and the promise constructor takes in a function that does all of the work. So basically that function is where all of this work needs to happen. But part of the arguments here for this function are resolve and reject. So it gives us two functions that we can call whenever we're done and we want to resolve something, or if some error happened. So now that we have that, instead of this whole callback business, we can basically just call resolve right here. So after we read the file, we get its contents, we log it out, then we resolve the promise so that the then will run afterwards. And in the case of an error, we would just reject with that error. So this is pretty much the only time you would need to create your own promise, is if you're working with things that have callbacks and aren't promise-based. The one issue here, though, is our function actually needs to return a promise. So we can really just do return a new promise. And now this code should work. So this will call output file. We get back a promise. So now this thing's kind of just waiting. And then under the hood, the FS reads the file, gets back the contents, and then calls resolve, which in turn will call our .then, and it'll say we are done. So let's do it. There we go. We are done is the second thing that's logged. That's great. Now, in this particular instance, I don't need to make this an async function because it already returns a promise. I can, though. It's not going to break it. If I make this an async function, under the hood, JavaScript already knows that this function is returning a promise, so I can .then it anyway. So if I put the async keyword on there, it's still going to work just fine. But in this case, it's actually really not necessary because I'm not doing any awaiting of my own. If I was, for whatever reason, awaiting some promises, and then I also needed to do some callback stuff, that's when I would do make it an async function so that I can actually use async await inside of there. That I think that was it. I think that explains your question. And really, like, I had to think about it before we got there, but the main reason you would ever need to create your own promise is if you're dealing with something that is not promise-based and you need to turn it into something that is promise-based. Like in this instance here. Whew. Okay, that was fun. Let's keep moving. Golan asks, what is better for doing a quick documentation page for an API or a package, a custom-built one or a framework? I think it depends. Like if you're working on a large project with a lot of people and your documentation is potentially changing often, I think you should use some sort of framework. So there are things like API doc.js. I actually prefer this one because you create your documentation as JS.comments above all of your routes, and it'll document that RESTful API. You could use things like Swagger. Swagger's a little bit different because typically you have to define your API in a Swagger configuration format, and then you write your code based on like afterwards. But that generates automatic documentation because it's documented with Swagger. I believe Open API is now, it's like the same thing as Swagger, isn't it? I think they're cross-compatible, but regardless, both of these basically have a way of documenting your API, all of the endpoints, all of the headers that are required, example, response bodies, that kind of thing. But you do it all in pretty much one configuration file. And that is what generates your documentation. I like this way because like you do have to keep the comments updated, but you can write your API however you want, and as long as you have these comments in it, API doc will generate the documentation. So the question was, what's better, a custom-built one or a framework? I think if it's a large project and you have a lot of stuff that you're keeping track of, you would probably want to use some sort of library or framework that's going to help you keep things up to date. If it's just a couple of endpoints, you might just build one custom, or you might just keep a markdown file up to date anytime you change the code. I personally, and in a lot of my projects, am using API doc. I actually also wrote a custom little library that takes the API doc JSON that gets generated from all of these comments, and it turns that into a Postman collection. So you document your API with this. This will generate like either web-based documentation. There's a plugin for generating markdown-based documentation. But then I wrote a little library that will take that and turn it into something that you can import into Postman. So you generate your documentation, then you run that through my tool that generates the Postman documentation, and then you can import that collection into Postman, and now you have all of the example requests along the left, but all of that was generated based on this API doc stuff, which is cool. Good question. Giovanni says, what do you think about Flutter? Greetings from Mexico. Flutter is interesting. Flutter is, I believe, a cross-platform way of creating mobile apps, released by the Android people, I think. Yeah, Flutter 1.7 is live. Yeah, made by Google. I think it's cool. I think they also, I mentioned this a while back, but they have an, like, what's the Android language of choice now? It's not Java anymore. I spelled language wrong. No. I don't want to change the language. Take your pick. Java. Kotlin, that's the one. So Kotlin is now like the underlying language that you would use to write it. I'm curious if Kotlin and Flutter are related in any way. I mean, I think Flutter is actually using Dart. I don't know. I really don't know much about this. I probably shouldn't be talking about it, but I think it's cool that you can create cross-platform apps with it. And they are essentially they get turned into native code, which is potentially a bit different than what's happening with React Native, because React Native generates a JavaScript bundle, and then there's kind of like an interop between JavaScript and the actual app. I don't know. It's cool. Yeah, those are my thoughts. It's cool. Imat said, did you see all the drama about a function-based API way of writing Vue components? I did. And because we're mentioning it, let's write a Vue component with the function-based API. If we go to Vue.js on GitHub, yeah, they have the RFCs. So Vue.js version 3.0, there are a ton of RFCs. RFC stands for request for comment. And there's a ton of them on here where basically they say, hey, this is how we think we might do things. This is how we're planning to do something. Give us your feedback. What do you think about it? Does this work? Does this not work? And anyone that has a GitHub account can go on here and comment on that particular RFC. And the one that they're talking about is this function-based component API. So I think initially when this RFC was posted, it might, I don't know, I wasn't there from the beginning, but it might have been listed as a breaking change. And that's really what got most people worked up, because it kind of changes the way you write your components. And honestly, it looks a lot like hooks and effects with React, where you kind of just have one function, all of your code's in there. Yeah, but the biggest backlash was people were just like, oh, this is going to break all of my old code. Nothing works the same anymore. This is horrible. Why are you doing this? People freaked out. They should not have freaked out because, like I said at the beginning, this is a request for comment. If you don't like it, just say it. And if enough people say that, then we can, or the collective Vue community can make sure that it won't be a breaking change in the upcoming version of Vue. So yeah, and after all of that stuff happened, Evan Yu kind of commented, is it set in stone? It's a request for comment. Pull requests are still open. And it's not a breaking change, so you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can keep writing components the way that you used to, or the way you do in Vue version 2.0. So yeah, we can look at the examples to see what it's talking about. Okay, this is the way that we do it today in Vue.js 2.0. We have a script. It exports an object, and then it has all the things that we know about. So as a Vue.js developer, you know that there's a data object a data function that returns an object. There's a methods object. Any function on there we can access in the template. There's a computed object. Any function on there becomes a computed property we can use in the template. And this is how we write Vue.js applications. With the function-based API, it works like this. So your script now exports an object that has a setup function, and your setup function can use these things like value or computed. So value is a way of creating basically a reactive data property, just like you would with a data object. Computed is a way of creating a computed property, just like you would with the computed object. And then any functions that need to modify those variables, you just write them like you would. And then ultimately, the thing that gets returned at the end of the setup function are all of the properties, computed properties, functions that will then be available inside of the template. So because this thing returns count, double, and increment, now inside of your template, you can access count, double, and increment. So it's actually like kind of like an extreme simplification. So instead of having a bit more verbose code where things are kind of like broken out, you can kind of just do it all in this one function, and that's how you write your Vue.js code. I think it's interesting. Like, I like the fact that in this, you actually don't have to think about this. Like, I know this in Vue.js is a fairly simple concept because the functions are bound for you. But that is one thing that people might not like, the fact that you have to do this.count in any of your functions. Whereas here, it's literally anything that's just in scope inside of the function. And to me, this is very like Svelte-like. So if you've used Svelte, there's really no this keyword anywhere. You just create your variables and you use them. And that's kind of what I like about this. A lot of people were complaining, though, because this is very different. This is very different from the old way of doing it. But I think it's pretty cool. And I've been writing a lot of React code lately with like hooks and effects. And it's a very, very interesting way of doing things because your code is like less verbose. There's less boilerplate. You kind of just write what you need to do and it kind of just works. So I'm a fan. Does that mean I'm going to go back and convert all of my code that looks like this to this? No, absolutely not. Like newer apps I build, I might choose to use this way of building it, but old apps don't have to be rewritten. New apps that are written this way in Vue 3.0 will still potentially work as long as there's no other breaking changes. So yeah, that was what all of it was about. I think this is cool. And yeah. So this one is fetching data based on a prop. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, it really, really simplifies things. And like I said, you just have this one setup function. There is no this. Basically, anything that's in scope is going to work. I think it's cool. I think at the beginning of this, I said I was going to write something with it. I know there is... I think there's a plugin. For Vue.js 2.0 that allows you to write code like that. Yeah, and this was another big complaint people were having. This looks like React. Why don't I just use React? First, the template syntax doesn't change. Yeah, I think for me, JSX is one of the weirdest things about React. And so you don't have to use JSX. You can keep using the regular Vue template syntax. Second, if you use React, you'll most likely be using React hooks. This API is certainly inspired by React hooks, but it works fundamentally differently and is rooted in Vue's very own reactivity system. Yeah. If you've looked into at all how React hooks work, and some like the hooks like use state, it's actually at its core very simple, but also because it's so simple, it's very easy to get wrong. Like in React, if you don't have all of your use state like in the same order every time and at the top level, things will actually break because under the hood, it's literally just an array of all of your state values in the exact order that you define them. So if you have like a use state inside of an if that only gets called every now and then, things get out of sync. It's super weird. But with this, that wouldn't happen because you still have Vue's reactivity system. So yeah. I talked a long time about this, but those are ultimately my views on it. I think it's pretty cool, but also at the end of the day, if you don't like it, you don't have to use it. So yeah. Myrn is saying, can you also talk about Rxjs along with promises? I'll just mention what Rxjs is because some people might not have heard of it. So Rxjs stands for Reactive Extensions to JavaScript, and it's pretty much based on streams. I wonder if I can find they're nice little animations because that's really I found the best way to understand streams. Yes, an animated intro to Rxjs. Yeah, so they are streams. They're calling them observables, but basically you have things like map and filter, which you can do all day long in JavaScript, like on a regular array. But the special thing about map, filter, whatever else in Rxjs land is if the array that you are map or filtering on changes, then your map or filter function is going to get called every time. So it's kind of like listening for those changes. And it basically like streams the input through the map or the filter as things change. And so really the way to visualize it is kind of like a stream of values. I mentioned it earlier, but this is different from promises because promises can only really be resolved once. Once a promise has been resolved, you can't try running it again. You basically have to call a new function that creates a new promise. Whereas these can be resolved. They can produce new values all day long. I guess one thing to mention is the latest version of Angular uses Rxjs, I think by default. Okay, I was going to show an animation. I'm not, though. My voice is getting scratchy. I've been talking a lot. All right, I'll start there, but I'll also catch up on the chat. John asked about what's my keyboard. Yeah, let me get you an Amazon affiliate link. I got my keyboard on Amazon. I think they're MX Red switches, but also it's just a keyboard from mechanical keyboard from China that I haven't really done any customization on. Yeah, this is the one. This is a mechanical gaming keyboard by E-Element. Oh, it has blue switches, and it actually came with like the switch remover tool. It's super cheap. It's only $35, but it's a good entry-level mechanical keyboard if that's something you are interested in. So there's a link. Check it out if you like the sound of my keyboard. All right, let's catch up more on the chat. Katoli says, hello, am I late? I think you came in probably like an hour in. You're not late. We're just doing random stuff. We're just hanging out. Yeah, Avi asks how to write good code. I mean, I think for me, code that isn't brittle is good code. So like when one little thing changes in your app, if you have to update your code in 10 different places, that's probably bad code. But if you only have to update it in one place, to me that's good code because there's less ways of breaking things. So yeah, good code. It's harder to break good code. I'll say that. Good code is less code. Like if there's less code that I have to read through, if you're reusing functions you've written or using libraries that handle the dirty work, to me that's good code because it's less area again for things to break. And if you need to change things in one place, if they're all calling the same function, if you need to change things, if they're all calling the same function, you change it in one place and it fixes it everywhere in your app. So to me, good code is code that, when changed, doesn't have to be changed, or when it needs to be changed, doesn't have to be changed in multiple places. I don't know. I feel like I'm just rambling now, but yeah, that. Yeah, Topher is saying, we were talking earlier, but Topher is saying what's embarrassing is when the bad code is your own from years before. Yeah, that's definitely happened. Like if you ever, people do this all the time. They're like writing something like, oh, I'm not going to add comments to it. Or I'm not going to document it. I know exactly what I'm doing. But you yourself, if you go back to that code just like a year later or 6 months later, you probably forgot what you were doing. Like when you're in the zone and you're coding, like you have the whole flow of your code up here. So like, I know this function calls this function and I know this relates to that. And so it's all there and it all makes sense to you. But when you go away from that for any extended period of time and come back to it, it's kind of like you're looking at code that somebody else wrote. So yeah, document your code, write easy to understand code, like self-documenting code. That's what I prefer because the code is itself the documentation, which itself updates. You don't have to keep a separate document or you don't have to keep the comments updated. It just kind of like reads like poetry. Hello, we all love Pakwalan. Welcome to the stream. And hello, Matthias Jacobson from Denmark. They want to know more about JS. Any books I would recommend? Yeah, I've recommended them a couple times on this stream, but you don't know JS, YDKJS, is free on GitHub, but you can also order print copies. This is a book series by Kyle Simpson, and the Up and Going book actually teaches you about programming and variables and loops and if statements and stuff like that. But all of these books go very in depth how everything works. There's also Eloquent JavaScript. This is also available free to read online, but you can also order a print copy of the book if you want. But again, this teaches you how to program and it teaches you the basics of JavaScript. Both of these are really great. Eloquent JavaScript is cool because certain chapters actually have, let's see if I can find one, interactive examples like inside the book where you can actually so if you click on any code example in this book, you can update it. I don't know if the sometimes there's output of the code, and then updating the code will change the output. So this book is cool as well. You might laugh, but the book JavaScript for Kids, because it's written for kids, is a really quick and easy way to get up and going. Wait, is this the one? No, it's one from No Starch Press. Yeah, it's written for kids technically, but anybody can use this book to learn JavaScript. When I worked at Galvanize for a while, they actually had this book as a requirement for students that were coming in. I mean, we had students that were anywhere from 18 to 60 years old, and they had to read this book as a prerequisite. So yeah, check that one out. JavaScript for Kids, Eloquent JavaScript, You Don't Know JavaScript. There are probably other good ones out there, but these are good. Eloquent and You Don't Know JS are all free online. You do have to buy the JavaScript for Kids, but you can get a sample chapter if you want. Check them out. Shatan says Laravel is dope. It seems pretty cool. And now Laravel actually comes, I don't know if it's bundled, but it comes with Vue.js. So like if you're, when you generate a Laravel app, it kind of has Vue in there. So I like that about it. Oh, wow. Yeah. Topher is saying, because we were talking about just high cost of living in Denver earlier. But yeah, they bought a 1,000 square foot home, $331,000. It's expensive. Avi is asking, is there any reason you use npm and not Yarn? Maybe, mainly because it's the supported thing from Node. I've had issues in the past with Yarn, specifically like Yarn combined with now, like deploying to now, and yeah, I just prefer npm. That's all. Krisu is asking why not pnpm. I don't know if it was Krisu, but someone recommended pnpm on the last morning tea stream, and this is really cool because pnpm in an ideal world would be the thing that I use, but I found if I was trying to do things like pnpx, or if I was trying to run the Vue CLI with pnpx to generate a Vue app, it actually didn't do the linking properly, so things kind of broke. But in general, it's cool. But the one thing that I don't like about it is that it creates, and it's the same thing, and so this applies to Yarn too. So Yarn generates a yarn.lock. pnpm generates like a pnpm yaml.lock file. npm generates a package lock.json. And for me, like I create a lot of open source projects and projects for people to like use locally, and the majority of people are using npm because that's the main thing. And so if I'm creating projects that have a pnpm lock or a yarn lock, then it may actually break if they decide to use something that, if they decide to use npm because maybe it installs the wrong version of a package. I don't know. This is really cool. In an ideal world, npm would just work this way, but there are still some bugs that they need to work out. Hello, Really Cygnus. What are we doing here today? We're just hanging out. Initially, this was a morning tea stream where I'm like looking at new news and stuff like that. Oh, I want to look at this one. This is TC39. That's Technical Committee 39. They're the people that decide what are the new features in JavaScript, but something's happening. But yeah, what are we doing? We're just hanging out. I'm answering questions. Yeah. Hello, Cassandra. Welcome to the stream. Alex Lane, missing you in Galvanize, cohort 42 at Platt. That's great. That was a while ago. I taught, when I started at Galvanize, I taught G15, so cohort 15, G21, G25, G38, G51. I think I taught G71 for a little bit. I taught G89, I think. Yeah, so that's great. Oh, good call, Austin. So I think this is in reference to earlier when I showed the example of imports and exports. Yes, so they're saying you could use TypeScript. By default, TypeScript supports import-export syntax. So you could technically use the TypeScript compiler to run this code through it and compile it. though you may have to turn off type checking because I'm not doing any type checking here, and it may complain about that. But technically, yes, it can convert import-export syntax. Hello, Leon. Welcome. Pijo is asking, have I ever tried Dino? Where are we? I'm way behind. Wow, I'm way behind. Okay, I'm gonna get through the chat just so I can see anything people were talking about the stuff that I was doing. I haven't tried Dino, but Topher mentioned it earlier, and it seems cool. It seems cool. Yeah, embrace the horribleness, but keep improving. Yeah, so like embrace the suck. Like no, just like and I think the the idea there is like don't get too cocky. Like don't get too what's the word? Yeah, just like overconfident. Like, yes, my code is the best. No one can break it. No one can hack it. This code is so cool. No, like your code is bad, and well, it'll get better, but it's bad. It's bad right now. So embrace it and kind of like just stay humble. Like know that you can always write better code. You can always be improving. Yeah, Hexception is saying they're rewriting a game server. I bet that's a ton of code. Definitely. Rico is saying, my channel is part of our gaming community's stream spam bot now, so I won't miss live stream. That's great. Appreciate that. Vias is saying, can you try React Big Calendar? I think you mentioned this one a while back, maybe on a previous stream. But I can take a look at it. Yeah. Oh, Bahacha is saying, how would I rewrite the Trello code? I was mainly talking about the front end. And actually, it's been so long since I looked at that project. I think I actually did do a stream where I refactored a bunch of stuff. So maybe I wouldn't rewrite it. Maybe I just would like make sure everything is on the latest versions of all the libraries and stuff like that. But I would want to do something similar with React, because I know that was that would be really popular. What's super interesting is, like, I never have any idea how well my videos are going to do. This video, build a maps app with Leaflet and React, has 30,000 views. Like this video is like one of my most viewed videos, and it's like a 4-hour long live stream, which makes me think that I should probably, this was streamed a year ago now. Yeah, wow, that was a year ago. But over time, it's gotten a lot of views, and it kind of went up in viewership. But the point I'm making is this app I built with React. And apparently everybody wants to build a Maps app with React. So I thought maybe I actually would build the Trello clone again, but with React instead. But I could just use the same backend. So maybe I'll just rewrite the front end. I don't know. Zuhaib is asking what instead of jQuery nowadays. So for one, you can just use, don't use any library. Just use regular DOM manipulation. Aside from that, there are some libraries out there that are like a subset of jQuery's API, and it's really things that the browser doesn't support anymore, or that doesn't have built in yet. I know Zepto.js was one of them. There are probably others. I don't know if this is the more popular. Yeah, but Zepto is a minimalist framework with a largely jQuery compatible API. So like all of the things that you're used to in jQuery, you can do with Zepto, but it is much, much smaller than jQuery. If you search for you might not need jQuery. This is a super interesting site. It's called You Might Not Need jQuery. And if I just search for something like Ajax, this shows you how you would do it with jQuery and then how you would do it with just regular vanilla JavaScript. And a lot of times it's not that much more code. This is a bit outdated though, because it is showing XML HTTP requests when now you can do this with fetch in the browser, which is a little bit easier. What else? Find? Yeah, so instead of using select element dot find, you can just use query selector in the browser, or query selector all. So yeah, there might be some libraries that are smaller, like Zepto. There might be some other ones, and then this site just shows you, hey, just write it with JavaScript. You don't really need jQuery. Yeah, this thing is kind of doing the same thing. It's just showing like query selector and stuff like that. Halil is asking, do I know reactive programming? So technically things like in Vue.js are reactive programming, or Svelte is reactive programming. Are you talking about anything in particular? Oh, like reactive, so like observables, or like Rxjs, which we were talking about earlier? Personally, no, I haven't really used it that much. But just in general, I understand the idea of reactivity, where you can basically define things, things have dependencies on other things, and when something changes, anything that was dependent on it also changes, that kind of thing, yeah. Oh, cool. Some good news from Howell. Says, hello, CJ. Nice to see you live again. Hello. I missed watching you. Life got busy, but I have good news. Since I started watching you, I got a coding job, first one, and I'm actually a lot better than I was. That's awesome. I mean, we were talking about it earlier, just like getting better at coding. The more you do it, the better you get. You get a job, you get more and more projects, different projects, you learn different things. That's great. Congrats, Howell. That's awesome. Austin is saying, yeah, we'll deal with procrastination tomorrow. I think somebody asked, how do I deal with procrastination? Yeah, the answer is we'll talk about it tomorrow. Shaitan is asking, what is dynamic imports and code splitting in Webpack? We can talk about that. Absolutely, we can talk about that. Daniel says, doing a Pomodoro clock method helps me with procrastination. I think it's just the idea that I only have to work on something for a set period of time. Yeah. So if you're not familiar with the Pomodoro technique, it's typically setting a timer for some preset time. I think usually it's like 25 minutes, but you basically keep track of all of your 25-minute intervals. So you say, okay, I'm going to set this timer for 25 minutes, and I'm going to do this dedicated task. And then you do it, the timer goes off, and you mark down, I did 1 Pomodoro. And so you're basically breaking up your work into smaller chunks, so it's a bit harder to procrastinate. It's easier to think about things in smaller pieces. So yeah. I guess we'll talk about it right now. I don't deal well with procrastination. The way I deal with it is I end up doing things last minute. I end up lacking sleep and just like finishing it right before it's due when I had a long time to actually work on it. I have not come up with a good way of dealing with this. But at the end of the day, I graduated college. I've had multiple jobs, successful jobs. And in all of it, I have been an extreme procrastinator. So it's kind of like to my own detriment. I procrastinate a ton, but I still get stuff done. So I keep procrastinating. I don't know. Dirkerall is asking, how do I explain to my boss that making a web application based on 3D is not easy? And I've got a Patreon pledge from Mavendra Singh, who pledged $1. Appreciate that. Thanks so much. But Dirkerall was asking, how do I explain to them that 3D is not easy? And how do you talk to old people about coding software development? It's tricky because depending on the type of person, like they might be overconfident in their understanding of things and just be like, I saw it on a web page, why can't you do it? But I mean, if you are doing 3D things, Three.js, you might have heard of it, but this makes things a bit easier. But at the end of the day, the code under the hood of Three.js is really complicated. It's WebGL code. So I don't know. You basically you just can say that like it's a different type of programming. Things on the web by default are typically meant to just be 2-dimensional squares, simple shapes, simple text. And when you go anything above that, it's going to take a lot more time and a lot more code. Unless you're using something that's pre-built, and then it might not do what you want it to do anyways. So I don't know. And then how do you talk to old people? Just talk to them like they're regular people. But like I said, it's harder if they have certain assumptions or like think they know more than they actually do. Otherwise, just use your empathy and talk to them like they're regular people. Because I mean, not everyone is technical. We are growing up in a world or living in a world where a lot of the people in the world have really only been exposed to technology. I mean, there are some people that have been exposed to technology and like iPads and phones and stuff like that, like since they were born. So that's really all they know. And then the older generation, which this stuff kind of just pop about when they got a little bit older. So it may be harder, but at the same time, they're just people too. They can figure this stuff out. I don't know. Hello, Kevin. We're just answering questions and hanging out. Talked about my keyboard. CMRJ says, hello from Rzeszów, Poland. Rzeszów? Rzeszów, Poland. Thank you for your time and streams. You're welcome. Avi is saying, get element by ID is certainly more performant than query selector. Yeah, I think it depends on the browser implementation, but yeah. Avi is saying, an HTML collection will auto-update, unlike a node list. Really? So like if you were to add something to the page that has a particular class, the HTML collection will pick up that the DOM has changed? Is that true? Interesting. Oh, is Dirkerall from Poland too? That's great. Yeah, and I talked about Next earlier, but yeah, Next is the same thing as Nuxt SSR for Vue. Ooh, I like it. Daniel is saying, build a random question outputter, then put all of the chat questions in it and let it serve you one of them, and then checking it done and removing it from the pool. That's interesting. It probably should be that questions that are asked earlier in the stream have more weight, so that I answer them. I'm more likely to answer them. I don't know. Oh, but Danielle is saying, then everyone has an equal chance to get their question answered. I guess that's true. So maybe it shouldn't be based on like when the question was answered, just like everyone has the same chance of getting it answered. Yeah. Hello, Salmon. Welcome to the stream. There's some Polish talking happening. I don't understand Polish. I think it's Polish. I thought Dirkerall was... Are you from Poland? I thought you were from somewhere else. But maybe you speak Polish. Harsh Patel is asking, what theme and font are you using in VS Code? So if you go to the Coding Garden GitHub, there's a VS Code settings repo, and this has all of my settings in it. So I'm using the font Anonymous Pro, which is pretty cool. I've used it for a long time now. And the theme I'm using is called Seti Monokai. This one, it's nice and rainbowy. But you can check out that GitHub repo, and it has all of my settings. I also have my all the plugins that I use, and then I have my settings JSON file, so you can take a look at that. Chris Perez is saying they can give you a strike for copyright for the video. Do you mean earlier when I was like playing a YouTube video? That's definitely possible. I've gotten copyright strikes before just because I had music playing in the background. Like I wasn't streaming the music directly. Like it was literally just on in the background and I got a copyright strike. So yeah, it's possible. Robinson is saying 7 days. It's been too long, CJ. Yeah, I've been busy as well. And I have a housewarming party coming up next weekend, so I'm going to be busy this week as well. So that's why I wanted to get a stream in today. Yeah, I think I've been streaming close to 2 hours. Yeah, I wanted to get some quality you and me time in because this week I may not stream, mainly because I'm cleaning my house and preparing for the housewarming party. Hello, Robin! It took me a while to get to your hello message, but hello. Robinson is asking, I use PNPM. Can you explain the advantages and disadvantages of PNPM? I will, just because it interests me so much. And I mentioned it, like, I wanted to build something like PNPM for a very long time, because the way Node.js works is when you type in pm install, it literally downloads. I mean, it does use caching. So let's say I need to, like earlier, I had to do npm install webpack. If we look at our package JSON, it has webpack and webpack CLI in there. So earlier, when I typed npm I webpack, what this did is npm first said, hey, do I have, well, probably first it reaches out to npmjs.org or .com and says, what is the latest version of webpack? It comes back, and then it says, hey, do I have that version of webpack on this machine? Yes, I do. Let's copy that entire directory from wherever it is into this directory. So if we look, there's this node modules directory, and if I go into node modules, there's all of these packages, all of these folders, and webpack is in here somewhere. Yeah, there's webpack. But every single one of these folders is that full JavaScript library. So like if I go into the webpack folder, there's code in here. Like if I go into lib, there's all these JavaScript files. So when you do an npm install, it literally copies every single library that it needs, including all of its dependencies, into this node modules folder. And that is very inefficient. Like every single folder you run npm install in makes a complete copy of that library and puts it there. The cool thing about PNPM is it keeps one source of truth. So basically in one place on your computer, if it needs a particular library, it gets downloaded and stored there. But then when you do a PNPM install, instead of copying the entire directory, it just does a symlink. So a symlink in like on a Linux computer, I think you can have links on Windows as well, but they're basically just a file that's pointing to some other file. So instead of making a complete copy of every single node modules folder into every project you install it in, it just links it to the main one. And so if you were to do an ls-l, which provides details about a particular folder, if you did it in a project where you did pnpm, you would see that each of these folders actually points to the actual file somewhere, and it's not a complete copy. So that's the major benefit. Anytime you run npm install, it's just a link, and multiple projects will share that same one if it's using the same version. And that way you don't have multiple copies on your machine. Because this is a lot of JavaScript code. One time I did a recursive delete of every node modules file on my machine, and it found over 10 gigabytes of node modules, and that's just way too much. We can actually, let's just demonstrate. Okay, so you saw that in node modules, this is a copy of everything, right? Let's do this. Let's move that node modules folder. I'm gonna kill this to like node modules.backup. Okay, so that's not there anymore. And now if I do I don't know if I think I have it installed, pnpm install. Yeah. So here's the cool thing. So it reuses stuff. So if I've used a particular library in the past, it doesn't have to re-download it. It can just link it. And so in this case, when I did an install of Webpack and Webpack CLI, it only needed to download 39 new things. But now check it out. If I go into that node modules folder and we do an ls, Webpack and Webpack CLI are literally the only things in there. And you can see that they show up as pink. So if I do a ls with -l, we can see that these are actually pointing to some other directory on my computer. So instead of being a complete copy, they point to some other directory. I think where this breaks, or I mean, it could be if your library or whatever is dependent on all of those other dependencies being in the same folder as node modules, that could break, but at the same time, they're all in this folder. So that should work. I don't know. But this is cool because it saves space. They're only links. You don't have multiple copies everywhere. I don't know. I talked about that way too long, but PNPM is cool. I think eventually, once they work out the bugs of like files not linking correctly or certain PNPX things not working, it's the way to go. It absolutely is. Omar is asking, what is the name of the add-on to add emojis in code? It's not an add-on. I'm just doing this on a Mac. So on a Mac, if you do Control Command Space, you can do it anywhere, and that brings up the emoji menu. And then you can specify emojis. On a window, if you're on Windows 10, you can do Windows key period, and that will give you an emoji menu anywhere. You could be in the code editor, anywhere. Sashin says, hey CJ, love from India. You're awesome, man. Appreciate that. Austin is mentioning Gitbook is good for small API docs. Yeah, I think Gitbook is a way of creating documentation or books from markdown files and from a Git repo. So yeah. Oh no, IntelliJ just crashed. Hope you didn't lose any work. Exception. Yeah, Simon is saying Flutter uses Dart. Okay. Paramjit is asking, I noted you're using DuckDuckGo instead of Google search. Do you prefer that? Is it better or as good as Google when searching? It really varies. I prefer it because by default they don't track you. The search engine that doesn't track you. And they have lots of cool things built in. So they call them bang commands. So if you type ! You can jump out and search any other search engine. So I typically use it to search Google if I need to, or search GitHub, or you see me doing this all the time. Like if I do npm some package name, this actually tells DuckDuckGo to forward my request to npm and then search npm for that specific thing. You can do the same thing with MDN. So I'm saying, hey, DuckDuckGo, go to MDN and search for query selector all. So that's one of the things that I really like about it. But the search results aren't always the best. You might actually see me jumping out to Google a lot because DuckDuckGo didn't exactly find what I was looking for, but it's only getting better. The more you use it, the better it gets. Hello, Emmanuel. It says, I don't like the return thing. Are we talking about promises that I was doing earlier, or is this something else? Return promises? Or this return? I don't know. Hello, Joel from Peru. That's great. Welcome, welcome. Gulen is asking, what do I think about util.promisify? I actually haven't used it, but I think it works with anything that uses a Node.js style callback. So a Node.js style callback is a callback function where the first parameter is an error and the second parameter is the result of that function. And typically, a function that requires callbacks, the callback is the last parameter in the function. So if the function has the callback as the last parameter and that function has an error and the result, util.promisify should work. Is that built into Node now? Oh, I guess it is. That's cool. Yeah, I haven't used it, but my guess is that's how it's working. So takes a function following the common error first callback style, so like this, and callback as the last argument and returns a version that returns a promise. So it's pretty cool. So any callback function or any function that works in that way, this will work with. If it works in a different way, it's not going to work. You're going to have to wrap it in your own promise. Hello, Batar. Welcome to the stream. Oh, cool. Riku is saying about good code, search YouTube for Coding Better rolled together with Uncle Bob. So Uncle Bob is the guy that wrote the book Clean Code and other books too. But I haven't read the book in its entirety, but I know a lot of the concepts in it, and that's where some of my opinions on good code come from. Coding Better World Together. I spelled world wrong. Is this like, oh wow, is this like it's like a workshop. This is like an 8-hour long video, but that's pretty sweet. Because I can't watch the whole thing in one sitting. Well, that's pretty cool. But yeah, Uncle Bob, clean code, that has a lot of good stuff on writing good code. Yeah. Obvious saying, in my opinion, instead of writing comments, you should write descriptive variables and functions. Yeah, so I call that, or it's called self-documenting code. So good variable names, good function names. Yeah, the code basically documents itself so that you don't have to add comments onto it. Don Wynn, and hello Don, is asking, any guidance to read source code, design patterns, file structure perspective? To me, it kind of just comes with time. Like, the more code you look at, the easier it gets at reading other people's source code. For me, I actually started my career reading other people's source code because I was put onto a team where a guy had been writing this very large application with hundreds of files and thousands of lines of code. And it was my job to get up to speed on that code base. And then eventually I actually took over that code base and I was like the new owner of it. So I basically had to learn how to figure out where things are, how to find bugs and fix them in a very large code base. So, I mean, that's kind of how I started my career. But for me, it just got easier with time. And the more comfortable you get with reading other people's code, potentially like the better code you write, or the easier it is for you to find bugs or figure things out. Like nowadays, especially because I'm in the JavaScript world, most libraries that I'm using are open source. So if I need to figure out why is this particular error being thrown, and maybe their documentation isn't up to date, I will literally just go to their source code and see, oh, this is why it's being called. And then that makes me realize, oh, maybe I need to call the function this way. But for me, it's like a what's the word? Invaluable tool to be able to do something like that. So I don't really have any guidance. I would just say do it. So like if you're using JavaScript and you're using libraries, go and read the source code. Like go to GitHub, clone the repo, just start reading. Just try to see if you can follow the code. There was a book someone wrote. I think it's like jQuery annotated. I spelled annotated wrong. jQuery annotated source. Maybe this isn't an official book, but this person literally went through the jQuery source code. So on the right-hand side, you see the source code of the actual jQuery library, and that's version 1.6. And on the left-hand side, they went through and in human words described what each line of code is doing. So that's super interesting too. Maybe not as relevant anymore because version 1.6 was released in 2011. But it's an interesting concept to like go through and kind of like read code like a book. Yeah. Hello, Conrad. Welcome to the stream. Okay. I'm going to attempt to catch up on all of the chat, pick like 3 questions to answer, and then I'm gonna go because I got stuff to do today. I'm a busy guy. Raphael is asking, what's a good instance for using Rxjs in React or Vue? It's really just if you prefer that style of programming. I actually saw a talk that the creator of, was it the creator of Rxjs? Who's the guy that does Egghead.io? Who's the owner? The creator? John Lindquist. Yes, so I was at the very first VueConf in New Orleans, and John Lindquist did a talk on using Rxjs with Vue.js. And it was super interesting and looked really cool, but it's really just a completely and totally different style of programming. So like, there's basically just like a custom thing that they built to allow them to use Rxjs with Vue, and the way you handle DOM events is different than how you would do it with Vue. You're basically a DOM event is an observable because you're waiting for that event to happen. So when is a good instance? Pretty much any app that you write in the regular style could be rewritten in a reactive style. There probably are some things that are better suited for it, but I really just think it's to me it's kind of like how functional programming is just another way of solving similar problems. I may be totally wrong on that, and people may be yelling at their screen right now, but that's kind of how I see it. Like, you could pretty much solve all the same things without it, but it's kind of just like a different way of coding. And if you prefer to think about problems that way, then you can solve them with it. Katoli's asking, what do I think about Noops, the REST bots from GitHub? I have no idea what that is. Noops challenge. This is cool. Welcome, Challenger. 20 mysterious machines await. Say hello to my Noops. All our Noops have simple APIs for you to play with. Bend them to your will to test your skills. There's the hex bot, which will give you back colors as hex values. Huh. Okay, so what's the point? Are they challenges? Like, can you solve them? Oh yeah, challenges. Okay, so yeah, that's cool. I had not heard of this. This would be fun to check out. Thanks for suggesting it, Katoli. Hello, Mario, who says it's 7 p.m. in Italy. That's great. Bobby is asking, what's the best way to pick up freelance clients? I've never really done freelance. I listen to the Freelancers podcast, which is the same people that did, or the same guy that did JavaScript Jabber. But they've had a lot of podcasts that talk about how to do it. If you listen to Syntax FM, that podcast with Wes Boss and Scott Talinsky, they talk about freelancing. They have way more insight into all of that. One thing I did pick up though is, was it? I don't know. I'm not going to say anything. It's bad advice, whatever I'm going to give, because I don't have the experience. So go check out those things. Conrad is saying, got a small front-end student work position at a startup, and I learned a lot from you. Thank you for that. You're very welcome. That's good to hear. There's a couple of people in the chat that said they've gotten a job, so that's great. Hiccup is saying, your talking seems slow since I usually watch you at 1.5 speed when catching your stream. It's funny that you say that, because a lot of students that I've had in the past have to get used to how fast I talk. And I've seen comments on some of my older YouTube videos where people are like, I thought I had the speed set at 2 times because I was talking so fast. I just, as a human being in the world, I move at a faster speed. Like I'm going through time much faster than everyone else. Hello, Domenico. Welcome to the stream. Apart from fetching gRPC, I'm only using Myrn. Okay. Topher, anyone else sitting around watching the stream in their underwear? It's Saturday. You're just hanging out. It's cool. Mario is asking, what do you think about Svelte? It could be the future of your React. I think so, yeah. So if I did a video, I think it might have been 2 weeks ago now, but about Svelte, and I think it is. Rich Harris, who's the creator of Svelte, actually did get in some conversations with Evan Yu on Twitter, Evan Yu is the creator of Vue. And Evan does not seem to like the idea of Svelte, because Svelte itself is kind of like a new language. Like, it looks like JavaScript, but at the end of the day, it has to go through a compiler to even become valid JavaScript. And so, like, the comment I saw from Evan Yu was like, oh, it's Svelte script, then it's not really JavaScript, which in a way it is. But if you think about it, every React app you see out there, every Vue CLI app, has to be transpiled anyways, because it's written in a way that the browser doesn't understand. So it needs a transpiler, it needs a template compiler. So it's like Svelte is doing all of that compilation and runtime stuff ahead of time, whereas Vue and React are doing just a little bit, and then they have a runtime that's like running in the browser. So I think it's the future. It creates faster apps by default because there's less to we'd have to wait and see to to see if the actual like creators, the contributors to Vue and React feel the same way about it. I don't know. Cool. Pranjal is saying, thank you so much for helping me build my skills. I've learned so much from you. And I got a 1-year internship as a full stack developer. Much love. Much love. Glad to hear it. That's great. Oh, interesting. Avi is saying reactive programming on Android, you do it with Flutter. I didn't know that. Cool. All right. I think the chats just keep coming in. There's so many. Okay. let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. I'll answer some questions and then I gotta go. Gotta go. Hello, Joel. Greetings from Peru. That's awesome. Wait. I went too far back. Oh, Dirk Girl is saying, oh, they are from Poland. Okay. For some reason, I thought, what did I think? Norway or... That might be offensive. I apologize, but that's great. and this person is from the same city. That's awesome. Where are we? I think we're around here. Triple Max is saying, how would you suggest I get ready for a mid-level pair programming interview? It's at Shopify, so they'll ask about Ruby, Rails, JavaScript, TypeScript. If it's a pair programming interview, you should try to find some friends and practice pair programming. Often, the pair programming interview is really just to see how you work with other people. Like, will they enjoy working with you on a daily basis? Because at a company like that, they might actually pair pretty often. It depends though, because a lot of companies say they have a pair programming interview when really they just give you a coding problem and like watch you solve it instead of like working with you. So it's really hard to say because I don't know what their pair programming interview involves. I've seen some interviews where you actually go on site and are pairing with actual devs on real things. And they just want to see like how you would solve things, and you're working with them to see if you want to work with them, to see if they want to work with you. I've seen others where you're really just given a whiteboarding style problem, but you need to solve it while they watch you code. So I don't know. If you can get more info about, or maybe look on Glassdoor and see if other people have interviewed there and see what kind of an interview it is, that's going to give you a better idea of how to prepare for it. So, hello, Infinite Forever. Hello, Akash. There's some more Polish talk happening. Pranjal is saying, please build a mass mailing web app in React. I think you mean like a an email. What do you call it? Like an email sign up form, an email list kind of thing. Yeah. Have I done a tips and tricks video for VS Code? No, but I definitely should. That's one thing that I have on the back burner that I should definitely do. Quick question from Raphael. Has anyone else experienced slow syntax highlighting with VS Code? I have. This happens when you have very, very large files with thousands and thousands of lines. And it also happens if you've had VS Code open for way too long. I had this happen yesterday. Like I had to close and reopen VS Code probably like 4 different times because the file I was working in was so large that syntax highlighting would break, autocomplete would break, and really just closing it and reopening would fix things. So Yutsav is asking, what company do I work for? I work for a company called 303 Software. It's based in Denver. We're a consultancy. Avi is asking, any good advice on where to study recursion? I don't have any good resources. Maybe someone else does. Let's see. Is there an easy alternative to React Redux? Check out MobX. Like if you're familiar with the way of doing things in Vue, MobX is like a more verbose way of doing it, but with React. Yeah, so check that out. All right, I'm mainly caught up. So let's pick like 3 questions, and then I gotta go. Gotta head out. Okay, where were we? We talked about Rxjs. Austin is saying, can you share some advice on securing Node.js applications? I will answer this one. Definitely. Beck is asking about styled components. I'm going to skip that one. Sorry, Beck, but I don't know too much about it. And I did kind of use JSS in the Hot Ones sauce list app, so you can check that out. Pranjal is asking, please show how to render a React component on click. That might be fun. We can generate a simple little React app. Okay. I'm going to do these 2. So the first one was share some advice for securing Node.js applications in production and production deployment. Let's create a new markdown file. Okay, what are my tips and tricks? The first tip is to check out the OWASP top 10 list. So OWASP is the Open Web Application Security Project. And so they're an organization, and they have like an online wiki that helps people secure their applications. And if you look, they do have a top 10 list. Yeah, the OWASP top 10. I think this is updated every year. Of the 10 biggest things in security that you should absolutely care about and have fixed or protected in your application. And this goes for front end and back end applications. Where is it? They have the 2017. Is there not one for 2018? OWASP top 10. Maybe they only released it in 2017. Okay, I'll link it here. They might have an updated one, but this is the 10 most critical web application security risks. And really, you should just know these and be preventing against them. So the first one is injection. So this is like not sanitizing user inputs. And how that applies to Node.js is really, it depends on what database you are connected to and what library you're using. For things like SQL, if you're using SQLize, really, I'll just say this: like if you're in relation specifically to Node.js, if you're talking to a SQL database, you probably shouldn't be using the raw driver, and if you are, then you need to absolutely make sure that you're escaping all inputs and parameterizing them. So for example, if we look at just the PG module on NPM, so PG is a module for talking to a Postgres database. And let's go to the documentation. Yeah, so you create a client and then you just send it SQL queries directly. But they're showing in their very first example that that they're actually parameterizing things. So like this $1 is a way of saying, I need you to escape and put a variable here, and the value of that is going to be over here. But it's also possible to just like directly concatenate your strings here, and that's where you introduce like a SQL injection vulnerability. So if you're using any library, you need to make sure that you're escaping inputs. Pretty much if you're using SQLize or Bookshelf or Connects, or any of the other SQL libraries, like they escape inputs by default under the hood, so that's one. What else? Cross-site scripting. There's a package called Helmet for Node and Express. And you can use it inside of Express. You just say app.useHelmet. And this adds some headers that prevent certain things from happening inside of a web browser. So these are all the headers that it sets. The ones that are checked are the ones that it sets by default. These are ones that won't break your application, most likely, depending on your configuration. But the other ones, like content security policy, cross-domain, those are ones that you need to configure specifically for your website. But it's really easy to just use Helmet inside of your app, and it automatically adds those headers to outgoing requests. I think one that it adds, so this is a super interesting one, is the powered by, what do you call it, header that is in requests. I don't know if I built any Node APIs lately on the stream, but by default, Node.js puts a header on the outgoing response that says X powered by, and it says Node.js Express. And the reason you would want to get rid of this is because if an attacker is looking at those headers and sees that you're running Express version 4.2, they could figure out that there are some vulnerabilities in that version and try to exploit your server. But this hide powered by module, which is included with Helmet, just removes that header altogether. Yeah, so those are some things you can do. What else? Yeah, really, sanitizing user inputs, cross-site request forgery. So there are some packages that will help you with creating CSRF tokens. Is there like CSRF Express, I think? This is the one. It's literally CSRF. Yeah, so this is a middleware that will add a cross-site request forgery token to outgoing responses that can be used in subsequent requests. But basically, this prevents people from running a request on a separate website that uses the cookies from another site to do malicious things like transfer all the money from your bank account, which wouldn't be possible in general because those banking websites are secure enough to add like the secure headers to prevent those requests from happening. But if they didn't have them set up, a CSRF token would make sure that the request is authentic and is coming from that website. So set up CSRF. I did a talk a while back, so if you check out on my personal GitHub, not on Coding Garden, I have a repo called Node Security. Yeah, I gave this talk like 2.5 years ago, so it could use some updating. But there are a ton of links in here to NPM packages you can use for like all of these things, and most of these were taken from the OWASP top 10 list. Yeah, I think I'll stop there. Here's a ton of resources. Keep your stuff secure. Okay, what was the next question? Please show me how to render a React component on a click event. I'm thinking like, should I do this? I'm gonna do this. So here's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna create a React app. Click example. And yeah, I think we'll just do it. So we'll have a basic component that has some state, and I think because we're here, we'll use the use state hooks. That'll be fun. And basically, when something is clicked on, we need to update our state so that something will actually show in the DOM. Yeah, maybe we can create one of those like expanders. So I think that's what we'll do. So we'll go, let's move this to React click example. I messed up. Okay, I'm gonna go into that directory. Did it use yarn? It used yarn. Okay, so we'll just use we'll do yarn start. So we'll start our React app. Cool. All right, let's make an expander component. So I guess, for example, I don't know, does Bootstrap have them? Yeah, the collapsible component. Yeah, something like this. You click it and it expands and collapses. So you're like hiding and showing it. What I'm thinking though is not just so like an expanding collapsing list. You know, like it has a little arrow right here and you click it and it opens or closes. Let's look up Material UI because I know it has something similar. Utils, inputs. There's the collapse API. What? Expansion panel. I think this is what I'm thinking of. Expansion panel. Here we go. This one. Yeah, so like you click it and it pops open. I think this is kind of what they're asking about. So how to render a React component on click. So we could kind of do that where we only want to show the thing inside of it when it expands. Let's see if Pranjala said anything else. They haven't. Yeah. Omar says, keep up with the good work, and hello from Baghdad. Hello, thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, yeah, I mean, I don't know if this answers his question exactly, but I want to create this. I want to create this custom component that looks like this, and then when you click it, it kind of just expands. Goes from that to that. Boop, boop. Okay, let's do it. So in here, let's create a new folder called components. We're going to create a component called the expansion panel. .js. And then we need just a regular, well, I think we'll make it a functional component. So we'll import React from React. We will create a function that right now is just like a div. And let's say it has a div inside of it that has a title from props, and then a div inside of it that has like the children, like the things that should be inside of it, inside of the expansion panel. So both title and children come from props, and then we'll export it. So export default expansion panel. Okay, so we have this little component which will take in the title and any nested children and then render them inside of a div. Now in our app.js, let's get rid of all the stuff we don't need. It's just literally going to be a div. And we want to bring in that expansion panel component, so we're going to import it from our components directory. And I want to be able to do something like this. So title is going to be something like click me. And then inside of here, we have some content, just like you should only see me if you clicked above. Eyes emoji, like that. Let's get rid of the all of the CSS in here. Yeah, so we just have some basic sans serif font. Here we go. Okay. So we're using this component, the expansion panel, and basically what we want is we want to see like a little box with like an arrow, and then when we click it, this part should appear below it, right? Right now it's just showing everything. But yeah, I think for this we should use styled components. So I think it was it Beck? Beck asked about, can you please tell me about styled components and React and best practices to style Material UI? Overriding its CSS with custom CSS. So for this particular question, Material UI uses something called JSS, which is CSS in JS, and this is actually different than styled components. But if you look at the Material UI docs, they have some documentation on basically how you override some of their CSS, but with your own custom JSS, which is slightly different than styled components. But I do think, do I want to use styled components or do I want to use JSS for this? So yeah, the way this works is you have a styled button. You have your little function that'll do its thing. I don't know. Create a styled H1. I don't know. You know what? I'm just gonna use regular CSS for this. No, I'm gonna use Rxjs. That's what I'm gonna use. Just because I'm familiar with it, and I think it makes more sense in this case. Like, I want to create some custom classes, but they should be scoped to that specific type of component. I think that's what I need. npm install Rxjs. Yeah. So we need to just inject it to the component. Wait, did I accidentally just close code? Okay. This is taking a while. Why is it taking so long? This took way too long. Very surprised this took so long. Wow. Installed 333 packages. Okay, so now we need to import inject sheet from Rxjs. Yeah, that's how that works. And then the component that we export is going to be inject sheet with our styles, and then that we pass the component in. So we need to define some styles. I think here we'll create a container class, and let's just say it has some margin by default. Let's say it has like 10 pixel margin. It has an outline by default. Let's say it's like 2 pixels solid gray. And then now our component gets access to classes, and we can say this div has the class name of classes.container. So now our expansion panel should have some margin, and it should have a 2 pixel outline. So let's check it out. Can't resolve in... I need to restart. I just installed that dependency, so I probably need to restart it. Did I install it in the right directory? Yeah, I think I did. Should be okay. Yeah. Okay, so cool. So now our component has 2 pixels of margin, it has a nice little outline. That's great. Let's say that we want to have something like a title class. And the title itself, I think, should have an outline as well. Maybe no, maybe not. Okay. Let's say the title has like a font size of like 2 Ms. And so now this is going to be have the class name of classes.title. So it's a little bit bigger. I think that's too big. Let's do like 1.5. Great. And now we need to hide the children. So the children should only be shown if the panel is expanded. So for this, we're going to need some state. And for that, I'm going to bring in the use state hook here. And so now our function ultimately will return this, but we want to use some state. So we'll say is expanded and set expanded are equal to use state with false. So by default, is expanded is going to be false. So that's what this hook is doing. And now we should only render the children if is expanded is true. So for that, I would probably just use either I would use it's just an expression. So you can do is expanded and this. And so the way this works is if is expanded evaluates to true, then it's going to evaluate this, which will show that specific element. The other way to do this is with a ternary. So you could say is expanded. So if that's true, then I want to show that element. Else show nothing. And in this case, null just literally renders nothing on the page. I'll do it with a ternary. That might be a little more clear for everyone. Okay, so by default, we should not see that. And basically what we want is when we click this, it should expand down so that we can see the children part of it. Let's go ahead and add a nice little area that you can click on. I think we're going to allow them to click anywhere on the title. So like you can literally click anywhere. So let's say the title has a cursor of a pointer. And that way they know that they can click this to expand it. Let's also add a little expander. So if it's not expanded, we want to show like a right arrow. So we're going to do... Yeah, let's see how material does it. So they have the arrow, and then when it's expanded, it goes back up. Okay, that makes sense. So we'll show the down arrow by default. That one. We'll give this a class name of classes.arrow. And arrow is just going to do like a float right. Yeah, like that. Give it a little bit of padding. Let's actually give the title some padding, and that should give the thing on the right padding too. Too much. Okay, great. So I want to click this or click this, and then it's going to expand. Great. So what I need is a click handler on the this div title. So right here, I'm going to add an onClick. And onClick gets a function that takes in the event. In this case, I don't really need to do anything with the event. I just need to do something when it's clicked. So what I'm going to do is when it's clicked, we need to call set expanded with the opposite of is expanded, because that way it's going to expand and collapse. So we'll say not is expanded, so that will flip it. So anytime you click anywhere on the title, we're going to call set expanded, which updates is expanded to be whatever value you chose. So now if I click it, there it is. Nice. But what we also want is we want this arrow to change based on if it's expanded or not. So we'll do this. We'll just have very similar to down here. So if, well, actually, I can do it inside. So I'll do it as the child here. So I'll say if is expanded, then we just want a string with the up arrow. This one. Because if it's expanded, you want it to be up so they know that they can unexpand it. Otherwise, we show it as the down arrow. Like that. Okay, so you click it, click it. That's great. I think I'm going to create just like a child class here. And they will also have some padding. Great. What did this one look like? Yeah, it's kind of like that. We can fairly simply add the CSS animation. I think we could do, if we just say the container transition all 1 second linear, it should, I think that should, does that not affect the height? Maybe not. I don't think I'll worry about the animations for now. But that's basically how we do it. So is expanded is internal state. So this is state that only this component cares about. And the reason we have that is we technically could create multiple of these. So if we just did lots and lots of expansion panels, they're not all going to expand at the same time because each one has its own state. And it sets its own state internally. So each little component is kind of like compartmentalized, and its is expanded state only applies to it. Yeah, so that's why we do that. And this use state thing is a new React hook, where basically this would be like creating state on a component with a property called is expanded. It's kind of the same thing. It's just like less verbose. And then whenever the title is clicked on, it updates, is expanded to be the opposite. So kind of like flips it back and forth. Cool. I think that's all I wanted to talk about. I'll check the chat to see if Pranjal has any other questions or anything like that. Oh, I'm in the wrong folder here. Let's see. Where are we? Yeah, so we kind of answered that question. Yeah, I think that's all I want to do. I've been streaming for almost 3 hours now. I gotta go, but let's look at the chat, see if there's any other questions, thoughts, comments. Yeah, so I'll keep this code up to kind of see, like, the main way of doing this, like, regardless of like how we're setting state or anything like that, is really this ternary, right? So if this is true, this is what's going to be rendered. If this is false, this is what's going to be rendered. And this can either come from state, but it also could come from a prop. This would be a little bit trickier because we would need to manage that in the parent component, but you could actually make it so that you have an is expanded prop here, and inside the component, we take that as a prop and then decide whether or not to show the expanded portion. So there's that. Cool. Cooler is asking, what do I think about web components? I think they're cool. I think they're great. I think eventually everything is going to be Svelte-like and web component-like, because in that idea, everything's just built into the browser. You don't need frameworks anymore. Code is just easy and fast, and it just works. What is this complaining about? Emoji should be wrapped in span. I don't want to. Damir is asking, which do you like working with more, React or Vue? I like Vue, mainly because it's just simpler. there's usually less code involved as well. The thing is, like, I find myself, especially with like the new hooks and effects, I feel like people that like React and like it just like writing code, because like I see myself falling into this trap as well. Like, oh, this is so cool, like I can convert my components and I can use state and I can use effects instead of like doing it the old way, and it's cool to just see like everything is so functional. But like, sure, it's cool, but is the code any more readable? Like, is it easier to understand? And sort of, maybe, but maybe not exactly. So because I do have to write React at work, like React is the main thing that I do. Well, one of the main things. I also write Node backends, but because I have to do it, I find myself getting obsessed over things like use state and effects and making the code smaller and more interesting. But at the end of the day, the Vue code, if I were to write the same thing with Vue, it'd be less verbose, it'd be less cryptic, there wouldn't be really any like ternaries. So I don't know, I prefer Vue. This is React. Valerine is asking. Yeah. Okay. One more question from Resmed. To generate a document for printing a PDF on my app, what tool should I use? LaTeX, Markdown, or other? It varies. I think there's a library called PDF.js. Yeah, so you can actually use JavaScript to generate PDFs like based on DOM elements or based on HTML. You mentioned it, but there are tools out there that can take Markdown and turn it into PDF. I think it's totally up to you how you want to do it. All right, I'm going to end it there. Thanks, everyone, so much for watching. This was super fun. Look what we made. We did other stuff, too. There's some other code examples in here. I'll push all this code up. You can see the link in the description is to the Morning Tea repo. That's where all the code from past episodes lives? Yes? I don't know. I've been talking for too long. But yeah, thanks everyone for tuning in. We'll see you next time. Wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. Here's this.